Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on politics of the European Union. The European Commission has issued further bonds in support of Ukraine worth 2.5 billion euros. These are made available to Ukraine as a loan. They serve as macro financial assistance and help ensure the functioning of the Ukrainian state. The EU's financial support for Ukraine this year thus amounts to 6.7 billion euros, with a further 500 million euros planned. Up to 18 billion euros can be made available in 2023. In this way, Ukraine can better cushion the consequences of the unjustified Russian war of aggression. In addition, the European Commission issued bonds worth 6 billion euros for the Corona Recovery Fund Next Generation EU. With the Green Bond launch, the Commission has issued a total of 35.5 billion in Next Generation EU green bonds to finance green projects as part of EU member states' recovery and also resilience plan. The Commission has provided a total of 96.5 billion in long-term financing under Next Generation EU so far in 2022 and 167.5 billion since the start of the program in 2021. The fund flows to the member states as grants or loans. They are used to finance projects that serve the sustainability goals of the European Union. The European Parliament and the Council of the European Union have agreed on the EU budget for 2023 on the proposal of the European Commission. The agreement provides for commitment appropriations of 186.6 billion euros and payment appropriations of 168.7 billion euros. This gives the EU considerable resources to cushion the serious consequences of the Russian war of aggression, both in Ukraine, its neighboring countries, and in the EU. Another priority is recovering from the coronavirus pandemic and preserving jobs. EU Budget Commissioner Johannes Hahn said about this, "In these difficult times, Europe is showing that it can work for everyone. Today's budget agreement will help fight the consequences of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. This is done through increased funding, which includes migration, solidarity corridors, sufficient energy supplies, defense, but also support for those EU countries that take in people fleeing Ukraine. With the agreed budget, funds are directed where they can make the most difference. In doing so, the most urgent development needs of the EU member states and the partners are taken into account, and that worldwide. The annual budget for 2023 will now be formally adopted by the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament. The final plenary vote is currently scheduled for November 23rd. Indonesian President Joko Widodo, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen as EU representative, and the other heads of state and government of the International Partners Group, the IPG, launched a partnership for a just energy transition at the G20 summit in Bali. It was developed jointly with Indonesia and is intended to help the country reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. To this end, $20 billion in public and private funds are to be mobilized over the next 3 to 5 years, including €1 billion in support from the European Investment Bank. The International Partners Group, the IPG, of like-minded countries brings together Denmark, Germany, the European Union, France, Italy, Canada, Norway, and the United Kingdom, co-chaired by the United States and Japan. Together with President Widodo, they announced the cooperation at the Global Infrastructure and Investment Partnership, so the PGII event. At least 205 million people worldwide are acutely food insecure and in need of urgent assistance. That's the highest level on record. Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen remain at risk of hunger. Ahead of the G20 summit in Bali, the Commission was stepping up its support to those most in need with a €210 million humanitarian aid package to meet growing needs in 15 countries. This brings total EU support for global food security between 2020 and 2024 to up to €8 billion. The EU and its member states are world's leading donors of humanitarian aid. The EU provides preventive food aid, but also during and after humanitarian crises. The EU-funded humanitarian aid is implemented in partnership with United Nations organizations, international organizations, and NGOs, and covers, for example, on a few areas: the adequate and balanced nutrition, shelter, healthcare, water and sanitation, as well as education in emergency situations. Through its humanitarian food assistance, the EU aims to ensure that the most vulnerable and most hunger-affected groups are provided with sufficient and nutritious food in times of crisis. In 2022, food insecurity reached unprecedented levels in both scale and severity. According to the Global Report on Food Crises, at least 205 million people are acutely affected by food insecurity and are in urgent need of help. This is double the 2016 level. And as I said, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen did remain at risk of hunger. Food insecurity has shown an alarming trend over the past 5 years, mainly driven by conflict, economic shocks, often related to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and climate change. The situation was dramatically exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine due to its impact on food, energy, and fertilizer prices, as well as supply chain disruptions. Sustainable management of the Mediterranean region is important, and that is the goal of the 5 multi-annual management plans that the EU and the neighboring countries of the Mediterranean agreed on for the first time. The 21 measures adopted are based on the EU's common fisheries policy and are an important step towards improving the ecological and economic sustainability of fisheries in the Mediterranean. The EU supports the implementation of all measures and the new strategy with an annual financial aid of 8 million euros. The agreement was adopted at the 45th annual meeting of the General Fisheries Committee for the Mediterranean, the GFCM, thanks to the joint efforts of the Commission, Member States, and more than 20 other coastal states. The 5 new multi-annual plans will cover the main sub-regions of the Mediterranean: the Alboran Sea, the Strait of Sicily, the Ionian Sea, and the Levant Sea. The multi-annual plans will help reduce overfishing and improve the status of some of the most valuable fish stocks in the sea basin, such as northern shrimp, hake, and red sea bream. In addition, they will consolidate the legal framework for the sustainable management of stocks to ensure the viability of the fisheries sector and a level playing field for Mediterranean fleets. In addition, the EU, Morocco, and Algeria agreed to set up a first joint restricted area for fisheries. The restricted area will cover the waters of Spain, Morocco, and Algeria in the Kabylia Mound area of the Alboran Sea. The EU will implement the adopted decisions through the 2023 Fishing Opportunities Regulation for the Mediterranean and Black Seas, to be adopted by EU fisheries ministers in December. The so-called solidarity corridors set up in May to Ukraine for the transport of grain in particular are reaching their capacity limits. Bottlenecks persist and logistics costs are high. The European Commission, a number of states, and financial institutions want to work together to ensure that this lifeline for the Ukrainian economy continues to hold and that global food security is strengthened. As one of the world's largest grain producers, Ukraine typically supplies around 45 million tons of grain to the world market every year. However, in its brutal war against Ukraine, Russia deliberately targets agricultural production and agricultural exports. Safe passage in and out of Ukrainian Black Sea ports has been blocked. As a result, world market prices for grain rose. This has led to food insecurity around the world and threatens the livelihoods of millions of people who depend on these grains. The European Commission will provide 250 million euros in grants to support the solidarity corridors. In the short term, they will support rapid improvements, particularly through mobile equipment. This should shorten waiting times and improve processes at border crossings and access routes. In the medium term, they are mobilizing the Connecting Europe facility, the CEF, and 50 million euros to support the infrastructure development needed to further increase the capacity of the solidarity corridors. The European Investment Fund, the EIF, signed commitments for 4 funds supporting green transition and climate goals at the COP27 World Climate Change Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The EIF implements the objectives of the InvestEU funding program, which aims to boost investment, boost innovation in Europe, and create jobs. The InvestEU program provides important long-term financing to the EU by mobilizing significant private and public funds to support a sustainable recovery. It also helps mobilize private investment for EU policy priorities such as the European Green Deal and the digital transformation. The InvestEU fund will be implemented by financial partners who will invest in projects using the 26.2 billion euro EU budget guarantee. The total budget guarantee will support the investment projects of the implementing partners, increase risk-bearing capacity, and thus mobilize at least 372 billion euros in additional investments. The EU Commission has approved the COVID-19 vaccine Vitpretin Beta as a booster vaccination for the European market. The protein-based vaccine developed by Sanofi and GSK is the 7th COVID-19 vaccine approved in the EU. The European Medicines Agency EMA recommended approval after thoroughly assessing the vaccine's safety, efficacy, and quality. The vaccine can be used as a boosted dose in adults after first vaccination with another COVID-19 vaccine. A variety of vaccines against COVID-19 is essential to protect citizens well. The Commission and Member States have negotiated a purchase guarantee with Sanofi and GSK that came into effect on September 18th in 2020. It gives EU Member States the option to purchase up to 300 million doses of vaccine if they wish, or donate the vaccines to low and middle income countries. In view of the consequences of Russia's war in Ukraine, the mood in the EU economy has deteriorated significantly. As a result, while growth in 2022 will be better than previously forecast, the outlook for 2023 is significantly weaker and inflation higher than the European Commission's summer interim forecast. This is the conclusion reached by the EU Commission in its recently published economic forecast. Real GDP growth in the EU surprised to the upside in the first half of 2022 as consumers briskly resumed spending, particularly on services, following the easing of COVID-19 containment measures. The expansion continued in the third quarter, albeit at a much slower pace. Amid high uncertainty, high energy price pressures, eroding household purchasing power, a weaker external environment and tighter financing conditions, the EU, the euro area and most member states are expected to slide into recession in the last quarter of the year. Nevertheless, the strong momentum of 2021 and the strong growth in the first half of the year should allow real GDP growth to increase to 3.3% in the EU in 2022, and thus well above what they forecast in the summer with the 2.7%. As inflation continues to squeeze household disposable income, the contraction in economic activity is expected to continue in the first quarter of 2023. Growth is expected to return to Europe in the spring as inflation gradually eases its grip on the economy. However, with strong headwinds still holding back demand, economic activity is likely to be subdued, with GDP growth expected to reach 0.3% in both the EU and the Eurozone as a whole in 2023. By 2024, economic growth is expected to gradually pick up again, averaging 1.6% in the EU and 1.5% in the euro area. As inflation was higher than expected in the first 10 months of 2022 and price pressure increased, the inflation peak is likely to have shifted to the end of the year, and the annual inflation forecast has been raised to 9.3% in the EU and 8.5% in the euro area. Inflation is expected to decline in 2023 but remain elevated at 7% in the EU and 6.1% in the euro area, before moderating to 3% and 2.6% respectively in 2024. Compared to the summer forecast, this means an upward revision of almost 1 percentage point for 2022 and more than 2 points for 2023. The revisions mainly reflect the significantly higher wholesale prices for gas and electricity, which are putting pressure on retail energy prices as well as on most goods and services in the exercise shopping cart. The economic outlook remains surrounded by an exceptional level of uncertainty as Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine continues and the potential for further economic disruption is far from exhausted. The main threat comes from unfavorable developments in the gas market and the risk of shortages, especially in the winter of 2023 and 24. In addition to gas supplies, the EU remains directly and indirectly exposed to other shocks in other commodity markets stemming from geopolitical tensions. Prolonged inflation and possible disorderly adjustments in global financial markets to the new high-yield environment also remain key risk factors. Both are compounded by the potential inconsistency between fiscal and monetary policy targets. The security environment has deteriorated as a result of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and protection of citizens and infrastructure needs to be strengthened. This also includes improved mobility of the European armed forces in order to be able to react faster and better to crises. The EU Commission and the High Representative have therefore presented an action plan for military mobility 2.0 in a package with an EU policy for cyber defense. In particular, the action plan on military mobility will help European armed forces respond better, faster, and in sufficient scale to crises erupting at the EU's external borders and beyond. It will strengthen the EU's ability to support member states and partners in transporting troops and their equipment. It aims for a better connected and protected infrastructure and tightens regulatory issues. It will strengthen cooperation with NATO and promote connectivity and dialogue with key partners. To ensure a well-connected, capable and secure military mobility network, the European Commission is supporting the action plan with funding instruments such as the Connecting Europe facility, that's a funding for dual-use transport infrastructure projects, and the European Defence Fund that is supporting the development of interoperable logistic and digital systems. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a fertilizer and energy crisis weighs on global food security and food prices. In a communication, the EU Commission is now representing a wide range of measures and guidelines to meet the challenges facing farmers and industry in the EU and also in developing countries. The communication outlines a number of best practices and pathways. They are intended to help farmers to optimize their use of fertilizers, reduce their dependency, and at the same time secure yields. Farmers around the world, and especially in vulnerable countries, are feeling the tension in the fertilizer market very clearly. At the international level, the European Commission will continue to strive for better global food security. Beyond the availability, affordability, and use of fertilizers, the EU will continue to address the root causes of hunger, including conflict and insecurity, climate change, and economic shocks. The EU will work with its international partners and member states to support the expansion of local production capacities and the creation of sustainable and resilient food systems in the most vulnerable contexts. While promoting this goal, the EU will pave the way for innovative approaches to support integrated soil fertility management by applying a range of site-specific soil fertility solutions that favor sustainable yield gains. The need to strengthen the overall resilience and sustainability of food systems in the medium and long term is in line with the communication on ensuring food security adopted in March 2022 and the Farm to Fork strategy and Repower EU. The European Commission wants to speed up the approval process for renewable energies and has proposed a temporary emergency regulation for this purpose. More renewable energy, along with energy diversification and energy conservation, are key to ending Europe's dependence on fossil fuels from Russia. On October 20th and 21st, the heads of state and government called for a rapid simplification of approval procedures in order to accelerate the expansion of renewable energies. In the Repower EU plan, the Commission had already proposed measures to improve the lengthy and complex administrative procedures. Since then, however, the situation on the energy markets has continued to deteriorate, which calls for urgent measures. For this reason, the Commission is proposing new measures in the form of a Council regulation based on Article 122 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU. The proposal complements previous contingency measures to deal with the extraordinary situation in energy markets and to accelerate the energy transition. It is valid for 1 year and covers the time needed in all member states for the adoption and implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive currently being discussed by the co-legislators. It targets specific technologies and types of projects with the highest potential for rapid deployment and the lowest environmental impact, against the backdrop of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fact that energy supplies are being used as a weapon, and that can contribute to energy supply security. The proposal for a temporary emergency ordinance is based on the assumption that installations for the production of renewable energy are of overriding public interest. As a result, new approval procedures with regard to certain exceptions provided for in EU environmental law could benefit from a simplified examination with immediate effect. In addition, the proposal clarifies the scope of certain provisions of the EU Birds and Habitats directives in order to remove permit bottlenecks for certain renewable energy projects. The EU Commission calls on the Council to take the necessary decisions without delay to allow Bulgaria, Croatia and Romania to participate fully in the Schengen area. In a communication adopted, the Commission takes stock of the 3 member states' implementation of the Schengen rules. For years, these member states have contributed significantly to the smooth functioning of the Schengen area, including during the pandemic-related restrictions and more recently in the face of the unprecedented consequences of the war in Ukraine. While the 3 countries are already partially bound by Schengen rules, internal border checks with these member states have not been lifted, meaning that they do not fully reap the benefits of being part of the Schengen area without checks arising at the internal borders. Full membership of the Schengen area is a legal obligation for those member states, and they should therefore be allowed full membership as they now meet the conditions. Enlarging the Schengen area without internal border checks will make the Union safer through better protection of the common external borders and effective police cooperation. It will bring greater prosperity by avoiding wasted time at borders and by facilitating contacts between people and businesses, and it will make them more attractive by significantly expanding the world's largest common area without internal border checks. The Schengen area is made up of 22 EU countries, that's Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Estonia, France, Finland, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands, Austria, Poland, Portugal, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, and 4 associated non-EU countries, that's Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. And so we have the world's largest area of freedom of travel. Ireland continues to have an opt-out in relation to the abolition of internal border checks. Countries wishing to join the Schengen area have to undergo a series of Schengen evaluations to check that they meet the requirements to apply the Schengen rules. Once the Schengen evaluation missions confirm that a member state can join the area without internal border checks, the unanimous consent of all other member states applying the Schengen acquis and that in full is required. And the European Parliament must also agree. On November 10th and 22, the European Parliament delivered a favorable option on the draft Council decision on the full application of the Schengen acquis in Croatia. On October 18th, the European Parliament issued a resolution calling on the Council to allow Romania and Bulgaria to join the Schengen area. The European Parliament and the EU member states have reached political agreement on the establishment of a new space infrastructure. The EU satellite system IRIS-2, Infrastructure for Resilience, Interconnectivity and Security by Satellite, is to be used in the future to ensure more internet security. 2.4 billion euros from the EU Programme for Secure Connectivity will be made available for its construction. With the negotiations completed, the way is now open for the final text of the legal text to be adopted by the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union. The economy and security increasingly depend on secure and resilient connectivity. For Europe, the development of a sovereign, autonomous and secured connectivity infrastructure is crucial. Digital hyperconnectivity and technological change are driving an unprecedented increase in demand for services dependent on cutting-edge technologies. Both government needs and satellite communication solutions are changing rapidly. Thanks to satellite-based connectivity via low Earth orbit, Europe will also be able to offer extremely secure connectivity to armed forces. The EU's space-based secure communication system aims to meet increased and changing needs. In addition, this should avoid dependencies on third countries and strengthen the resilience of the value chains. This includes the latest quantum communication technologies for secure encryption through an integration of the European Quantum Communication Infrastructure, or EuroQCI. The system will be based on the development of innovative and disruptive technologies and the mobilization of the new space ecosystem. The political agreement reached between the European Parliament, the Council, and the Commission now has to be formally adopted by the European Parliament and the Council. The Commission will shortly present several implementing acts in accordance with the programme and the regulation. In parallel, the Commission is preparing the tender dossier so that the secure connectivity system can be set up quickly. The EU Commission has presented a proposal to reduce air pollution from new cars sold in the EU in order to reach the zero pollution target of the European Green Deal. At the same time, vehicles should remain affordable for consumers and the competitiveness of the EU should be promoted. Road traffic is the largest source of air pollution in cities. The new Euro 7 standard will ensure cleaner vehicles on the roads and better air quality to protect citizens' health and the environment. The Euro 7 standards and the CO2 emission standards for vehicles complement each other in order to ensure high air quality for citizens, as in particular the increasing use of electric vehicles also brings certain air quality benefits. The two regulations provide clear direction for the automotive supply chain to reduce pollutant emissions, including through the use of digital technologies. The new Euro 7 emission standards ensures that cars, light commercial vehicles, trucks and buses are significantly cleaner in real-world driving conditions that better reflect the situation in cities with the greatest air pollution problems, and for a significantly longer period of time. The proposal concerns emissions from exhaust systems, brakes and tires. They also contribute to meeting the new stricter air quality standards proposed by the Commission on October 26th. As CO2 emissions legislation helps drive the spread of zero-emission vehicles, it is important to ensure that all vehicles on the road become significantly cleaner. From 2035, only CO2 emission-free passenger cars and light commercial vehicles may be sold in the EU. Despite this, in 2050, more than 20% of cars and light commercial vehicles and more than half of the heavier vehicles on the roads will still be emitting pollutants from their tailpipes. Even battery-powered electric vehicles continue to cause pollution from brakes and microplastics from tires. The Euro 7 regulations will reduce all of these emissions while keeping vehicles affordable for consumers. The Commission's proposal will be submitted to the European Parliament and the Council for adoption by the co-legislators. And this concludes this week's Outside Views magazine on the EU politics, but I hope to see you not only next week on this channel, but in the meantime on all my other channels. The video description shows you how. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.